Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Millennial Smark, and I'm back at it again with another video. Hardbody Harrison. Some of you may know what that name implies. You may know this guy. You may know the situation surrounding him. Some of you may be asking yourselves, who the hell is this guy? I'm here to tell you that Hardbody Harrison is the purest definition of absolute outright evil. A monster, a guy who honestly, he could have been a legitimate boogeyman of professional wrestling, and we're not talking about worms either. Hardbody Harrison is a name that rings bells in some of the legacy minds and historians of professional wrestling who have followed this guy and this disturbing case. If you don't know who he is, let me be the one to introduce you to this monster. Just to give you a quick lore and background for the gentleman, he did sign up for the military somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s because he did fight in the Gulf War back in 1981, 1982-ish. I can't tell you specifically what he did or whatever his MOS was, but he was in the military in the early 90s until he got an honorable discharge somewhere in the mid-90s. I think 1985 is what I read. He decided after leaving the military to go be a wrestler, and he trained in the WCW power plant around that time. I can't tell you who his trainers were, but he did train in the WCW power plant. He was a jobber majority of the time. That's why you probably don't know who he was. He was pretty much just a guy who went out there just to make the boys look good, right? Unfortunately, or I guess in this case fortunately, because fuck this guy, we'll get more into that in a little bit. After the whole AOL Time Warner merger, there was a situation where it was alleged that WCW, in particular, the power plant, were very, 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 very racist, right? I'll leave a link down in the description box below because that's a whole story within itself. But they allege that Eric Bischoff used the N-word, that Vince Russo, was, I guess the best way to say it was, the dude was a legitimate white supremacist. That's what the lawsuit states. Yeah, it gets really, really deep how they would give chance after chance to the white wrestlers, but with the black wrestlers, they would always come to the conclusion that they never really wanted to be there. So pretty much prioritizing white wrestlers over black wrestlers. This whole lawsuit goes over this, and maybe there's some merit to it only by the fact that, because I know most people are going to be like, well, Booker T, well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on if the situation legitimately happened, there was a payout, and Hardbody Harrison got himself a bit of a small check, right? Unfortunately, that small check, it didn't really do much for him, because about 4 years later, or I guess 3 years later, because I guess that would have happened in 2001, he got arrested. He got arrested in Georgia on 3 counts of false imprisonment, and after spending 1 night in jail, he was released on a $55,000 bond the next day. On August 23, 2005, FBI agents served a search warrant and raided Harrison's 2 homes in Bartow County, Georgia. On October 18, 2005, he was arrested by the FBI on a 9-count federal indictment for false imprisonment and trafficking women for commercial sex acts. If you look down in the description box below, we're going to go over this a little tiny bit, because when I read you the things that this guy did, honestly, I don't know how else to describe him outside of the fact that he is just a hideous monster. Link is down in the description box below. Former wrestler found guilty on human trafficking charges in Georgia. A federal jury returned guilty verdicts Wednesday against former professional wrestler Harrison Norris Jr., known in wrestling world as Hardbody Harrison, on multiple charges of sex trafficking and slavery related to a scheme to force women into prostitution, announced Rena J. Komisak, acting assistant attorney general for the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and David E. Namias, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. So this is the lore. According to the charging documents and evidence presented at trial, Norris kidnapped some of his victims and lured others to come live with him by promising to train them as professional wrestlers. Once he got the women to his home, however, he instead forced them to work for him as prostitutes. The witnesses at trial described beatings Norris administered and threats he made to bend the women to his will. On one occasion, Norris headbutted a woman and threatened to throw her through a hotel window when she would not engage in sex with two customers. Witnesses also testified that Norris imposed a strict military structure in his home. The defendant assigned each of his victims to a quote-unquote squad overseen by an quote-unquote enforcer, a woman conspiring with Norris to keep the victims in servitude. Witnesses also testified that Norris referred to himself as, and I quote, the general, sometimes made his victims sleep with him in the general's quarters, and pierced the victim's skin with a mark of their rank in the operation. Numerous witnesses also testified about parties at which the women were forced to have sex with numerous men and sometimes with other women. One woman testified that Norris forced her to sexually assault another woman during one of these parties. Evidence at trial established that forced acts of prostitution occurred at Hispanic nightclubs and apartments, at hotels, in the back of Norris's truck, and in North Carolina and northern Georgia. The victims also testified that they were forced to have sex with Norris. In addition to forcing the victims to work as prostitutes, the defendant made the women work in and around his two homes in Cartersville, Georgia. Witnesses testified that Norris required the victims to haul trees, lay sod, and paint, essentially slavery. The evidence at trial further established that Norris set strict rules and fined the women for for such infractions as talking too much or failing to exercise. In addition, Norris kept the women financially indebted to him by charging them for cigarettes, medicine, and food. Norris then told the victims that they could not leave until their debts were paid, all while continuing to increase the debt he claimed he was owed. The jury convicted Norris after 2 days of deliberation, and rendering its verdict, the jury specifically found that Norris's offenses involved aggravated sexual abuse. Because of this special finding, Norris faces a maximum sentence of life in prison. And I quote, "This jury has vindicated the rights of the numerous young women this defendant exploited, abused, and forced into prostitution. The Department of Justice, or the DOJ, will continue to prosecute vigorously matters such as this one involving the sexual exploitation of young women." United States Attorney David E. Namias said, and I quote, "The evidence at trial clearly proved that Norris used force and threats of force against the victims, forcing them to work as prostitutes against their will. Sex trafficking and other forced labor are forms of modern-day slavery and cannot be tolerated," as I stated. Human trafficking prosecutions such as this one are a top priority of the DOJ. In the last 7 fiscal years, the Civil Rights Division, in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney's Office, has increased by nearly 7-fold the number of human trafficking cases filed in the court as compared to the previous years. And it just pretty much ends off by suggesting that the FBI officers of the human trafficking, pretty much the government, the FBI, getting involved in this case overall in regards to the investigation in itself. Now, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. If I'm not mistaken, I don't see the original sentencing. I'm not sure if the original sentencing in itself was the 35 years or the appeal that he put in 2011 came out to be 35 years afterwards. Because he was sentenced, if I'm not mistaken, let me go to his actual Wikipedia page for a second. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was actually charged. So he was found guilty in 2007, November 22nd. But he was initially charged, I believe, in 2004. And then in 2005 is when they were actually given the search warrants, because that's when he bonded out with the $55,000 a year prior to that. And that's when he got the actual search warrants from the FBI the year following that. And then that's when he was actually arrested, for the false imprisonment and the sex trafficking in itself. Then he was actually found guilty and convicted in 2007. Now, I will say once again, he was sentenced to life in 2008 on April Fool's Day, of all places. I have another link down in the description box below to at least outline the appeal case in itself, just to show you how he actually tried to appeal the case, because some of the things that he was saying was pretty much lawyer speak. But I mean, evidence is right there. The women actually testified for themselves against Norris and all of this. But when he actually appealed it, he said I'll read it just verbatim. Norris contends that he orally objected to the pre-sentence report's factual findings. This appeal, however, challenges only the sentencing court's remarks characterizing Norris's treatment of the victims. Moreover, although he quote-unquote objected to the sentencing as unreasonable, unquote, Norris does not claim to have objected to the challenge remarks specifically. So pretty much all that he was pretty much being called on, he didn't challenge any of it. He just didn't like how they were characterizing the women in regards to how they were being treated, how they were being abused. Pretty much essentially saying he did nothing wrong, right? Norris argues the sentencing court committed a procedure error by selecting a sentence based on its erroneous finding that Norris's victims endured worse treatment than 19th century African American slaves. So he literally is trying to play with semantics here by just pretty much saying that they pretty much slandered him. Like, you making a comparison to women being, I don't know, the women that I treated, you're comparing that to African Americans as slaves back in the 1800s. You can't compare that. Therefore, because of your erroneous speech, I should be resentenced, because that's not how you're supposed to carry yourself decorum-wise. So your lack of decorum is why this appeal should go through, and I should have my sentence resentenced. I mean, not because of the actual crimes that I legitimately committed that I'm not going to challenge or try to contend with, not the fact that I'm an absolute fucking degenerate and a fucking monster, but because I don't like the fact that you made me sound more like a monster compared to the actual slave owners back in the 1800s, which, by the way, let me just say this, normally speaking, obviously, if you were a slave owner in the 1800s, obviously, you can go fuck yourself. I know people are going to probably speak upon the fact of, well, I mean, back in the days, Devontae, you got to take into consideration the social effects of how they actually viewed slaves back in the days compared to what we know nowadays. If you have a whip and you are hitting a human on their skin and they are bleeding just like you would bleed if you were hit on your skin, meaning that you know that they feel the pain, you are a piece of shit human scumbag. But it seems like that, well, at the very least, with what the slave owners did, is not even remotely close to at least what the troubles and trials and tribulations and disgusting things that Hardbody Harrison did to these women. Because at least for the majority, and mind you, don't even think I'm condoning fucking slavery, not even fucking close. What I am suggesting, however, is he is such a pathetic human being that he went well beyond some of the most depraved, evil human beings back in the 1800s who actually did have slaves. It seems like that he was on par with the slavery portion and did way more than that, like rape and branding them like they were fucking cows and forcing them to have sex with each other and other women and other Patreons. So he was also a pimp. I can't express how much of a disgusting human being this guy is, and like I said, it's a relatively old story. It's just something that caught my attention that I thought would be very interesting to talk about on the channel. I might find more topics like this later on for more obscure stories that are happening or happened in professional wrestling that I don't think most people are understanding or at least acknowledge is what happened in the history, in the chronicles of professional wrestling. He's currently incarcerated at this point to this very day, so that's a good thing, and he should probably rot away in prison. Hopefully this guy is suffering multiple upon multiple diseases, injuries, violations, and yeah, I can't stress enough how evil he is and how disgusting he is. So that's the story of Hardbody Harrison, and I would like to hear some of your comments down in the comment section below to see how you felt about Mr. Hardbody Harrison. But with that being said, my name is Millennial Smark, and I'll be catching you guys on the next video. Deuces and P Ice.